Katamari Damacy is about community. It's about being greater than the sum of your parts. It's about how the most basic and rudimentary can form up together to become a beautiful shining star. It's also about celestial beings with funny shaped heads. Developed and published by Namco and birthed from the brilliant mind of series director Keita Takahashi, Katamari Damacy took the gaming industry of the day by storm, winning several awards and guaranteeing the production of a sequel by the end of the year. Releasing in Japan on March 18, 2004 and North America on September 21, 2004, Katamari Damacy did not actually get to enjoy an audience in PAL regions such as Europe and Australia, being cited as too quirky for those audiences. Sadly, the early 2000s were still very much within that era in which certain inventive, novel, innovative and creative games were often dismissed by Western critics and mainstream audiences because of the prevailing attitude of the day, that, simply put, Japanese games were weird.
It's Japanese, it's slow-paced, it's as niche as niche can get.
どういう関係さ？無関係です。
It's oh so very weird.
Despite the prevalence of massive best-selling franchises like Mario, Final Fantasy or Resident Evil, to name a few. Thankfully today we live in an era of enlightenment, in which the Like a Dragon developers feel comfortable porting over games previously deemed too Japanese for Western audiences. In an era in which a Western developed game, Ghost of Tsushima, a game explicitly about a specific period in Japan's history, goes the distance in both Eastern and Western markets and draws in high praise from Japanese development studios. In an era in which we here in Europe finally get to experience Katamari Damacy properly in the form of Katamari Damacy Reroll, a remastering of the original game from modern systems that I'll be using for this review today. To be perfectly honest, Katamari Damacy is incredibly unique, trailblazing, and frankly, rather strange. It is unashamedly, unmistakably, and unfathomably Japanese, in the best possible way. It is a game in which you play as a small boy in a green outfit, rolling around a ball which gradually gets bigger and bigger as you accumulate all sorts of things, eventually submitting your hard work to your father and owner of a fantastic chin, the king of all cosmos, before it's transformed into a star, filling out the empty night sky. It's a game that I only got to play for the first time around 2 or 3 years ago, yet even at the time, I realised that I'd stumbled upon something truly special. In the words of the game's director, Keita Takahashi, Katamari Damacy is focused on being something new, easily understood, enjoyable and funny, and something that could only be expressed in a video game. Throughout this review, I'll talk about Katamari Damacy in detail and explain how it not only lives up to, but exceeds its original mission statement. With all that said, let's transport ourselves down to Earth on a mystical rainbow bridge, find a nice populated area, and roll up to be a single star in the sky. The story of Katamari Damacy is twofold, following two separate parties on utterly different scales and planes of existence. On the one hand, you have your character, the prince, and your father, the king of all cosmos. At the beginning of the game, amidst the drunken throes of an absolute bender, the king of all cosmos accidentally destroys, well, the cosmos, wiping out almost every star in the sky. Being the loving, responsible father that he is, the king delegates fixing the crisis to you, making it the prince's responsibility. To go about restoring the missing stars and constellations, the prince travels to the Earth, equipped with a bizarre adhesive ball called a Katamari, which he uses to roll up anything and everything into chaotic balls of varying sizes. His finished work is then converted by his father into new stars. At first they'll be rather small, consisting primarily of bits of stationery and shogi pieces, but eventually you'll be rolling up whole houses, neighbourhoods and land masses. Once you reach your final objective, to create the gargantuan Katamari of over 300 meters in diameter, it'll be used to recreate the moon. On the other hand, at a much more personable level, we follow the Hoshinos. They are very much your standard nuclear family, consisting of the mum, the dad, son and daughter. The father is an astronaut. This becomes important later.
あらあら、せっかくあなたの打ち上げを見に来たのに。
だって月がなくなったのですよ。
Somehow, the daughter seems to be in tune with the cosmos itself, being able to feel when stars and constellations return to their natural places. I don't know why. Besides the daughter's apparent enhanced cognition, this family almost seems to serve as the mundane, to keep the game and its world anchored whilst the general craziness of the events of Katamari Damacy happens around them. However, worlds do collide eventually, and after being rolled up by the prince during his creation of the moon, they're deposited off there for a nice lunar holiday. This does of course raise a lot of questions regarding what happens to the living beings caught and swept up by the Katamari, and honestly, I haven't got any good answers for you right now. As you can probably tell, Katamari Damacy truly is its own thing, a completely different beast from pretty much anything I've talked about on this channel previously. It truly is the perfect storm of creativity from the brilliant mind of Kaita Takahashi. Supposedly, even the title Katamari Damacy simply popped into his head during the early stages of development, and it remained as the name of the property from there on out. It's a particularly clever title too, for that matter. Katamari can be translated from Japanese as clump, and Damacy as spirit. Now, clump spirit certainly doesn't roll off the tongue as well as Katamari Damacy, but it's certainly a very literal description of the prince, if you ask me. The title also works particularly well in its native kanji, seeing as the symbols share the same right element, resulting in a kind of visual alliteration. I don't know, man, I thought it was neat. Returning for a moment to the original mission statement of the game, I think we could accurately describe the whole concept of Katamari quite convincingly as something new. I've always been a fan of video games with the audacity to mess with established control conventions. The Ape Escape series is an immediate example that comes to mind, whereby the various gadgets that you employ are assigned to the usual action buttons: X, circle, square and triangle. The left analog stick controls your movement, whilst the right stick controls which way your gadget of choice interacts with the world. Even looking at Ape Escape from a distance, you can see that it would have taken the same kind of eccentric trailblazing genius to come up with the whole concept as it would have to assign the jump button to R1. Another example that springs to mind is Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, an indie game from 2013 which styled itself very successfully as a single-player co-op game in which the left analog stick and L2 button controls one brother and the right analog stick and R2 button controls the other. A third and final example is Inertial Drift, a modern indie offering that's literally a twin-stick racing game for all intents and purposes. It's very cool. Katamari Damacy is very much a part of this club. However, it's still rather intuitive, and pretty much controls exactly how you'd expect it to. Despite the sheer complexity and crowded nature of the world around you, Katamari Damacy remains, at its core, a very simple concept. Much like a snowball rolling down a hill, Katamari Damacy is about pushing a ball around and into things, rolling them up, getting larger and larger as you do. It's all explained to you very helpfully in the initial tutorial. In short, pushing both analog sticks forwards, as you may imagine, moves you forwards. Pulling them back accomplishes the opposite, putting your Katamari into reverse. Pushing the left stick forwards and pulling the right stick back steers your Katamari to the right, whereas doing the opposite steers it to the left. It may sound like a stretch, but I think that the only way I can think to describe it is that it feels exactly how it should. The prince pushes the ball with both hands, as you can always clearly see in the bottom right corner of the screen. As such, it makes sense that both of the player's thumbs have to get a workout. Using two sticks instead of just the one gives the Katamari itself much more weight, in my opinion. The point is, it's very easily understood, because it makes perfect sense. Of course, it's not all about just the control scheme. Besides just rolling around here, there and everywhere, Katamari Damacy is a game about growth, and it does a fantastic job in introducing a sense of scale. The prince himself is tiny, barely an inch tall, if that, with your starting Katamari being not much larger at all. In the first level, you'll be rolling around a Japanese living room and tabletop, absorbing die, matches and pins, growing from a measly 5 to 10 centimeters. The next level pushes things a bit further, introducing a time constraint and doubling its goal, asking you to reach a whopping 20 centimeters. Releasing your hand gently, Katamari Damacy gets the ball rolling and hands you the reins. During this level, upon reaching the 10 centimeter mark, a new area, the garden, becomes available to you. As such, the general gameplay loop of Katamari Damacy is presented to you very early on in the experience. It's not a very long game at all, clocking in at around the 5-hour mark, so this utterly novel concept and gameplay loop never finds the time to get stale, and will almost certainly leave you wanting more. Despite the core objective of every level in the game simply being to get bigger, Katamari Damacy still finds ways to mix it up and mess with its own formula. For you see, you're not only going to be creating stars, but also full-on constellations. Depending on the constellation in question, the objective changes somewhat. For example, when creating Cancer, you'll be tasked with rolling up as many crabs as you possibly can. When assembling Cygnus, you'll be rolling up lots and lots of birds, and when creating Ursa Major, you'll want to locate and roll up the biggest bear that you possibly can. This level's actually rather difficult, seeing as Katamari Damacy is cunning, setting lots and lots of traps in the form of tiny bears that you'll have to avoid until you can find a larger one, as upon coming into contact with any bear or bear-related item whatsoever, the level ends immediately. Creating Taurus also presents a similar challenge. Katamari Damacy's gameplay is as simple as it is timeless. The bite-sized length of each level and frankly each game in the series constantly results in me coming back for more. Naturally, it's refined and expanded upon in the subsequent entries, but Katamari Damacy most definitely hit the ground rolling in this first entry. Of course, the gameplay wasn't the only thing that the series nailed right from the get-go either. I'll be honest, this was the section of the review that took me the longest to start writing, because it's genuinely rather difficult to talk about Katamari Damacy's presentation without simply descending into a free-flowing complimentary verbal hemorrhage. At this point, I've just given up and learned to accept it, because here's the thing. Katamari Damacy's aesthetic rules. Not since my first playthrough of Persona 5 have I been quite so simultaneously spellbound and blown away by a game's audio-visual feast of a presentation. Starting with the visuals, there's already a lot to talk about. Katamari Damacy is a child of the PlayStation 2, despite the current format that I've been playing it on. As such, you'd think that some graphical sacrifices would need to be made to preserve the vision of the gameplay. This is naturally the case, but done incredibly cleverly. Upon close inspection, pretty much every object in Katamari Damacy is angular, having a low polygon count, but designed in such a way that it still looks very appealing. Keita Takahashi originally worked in Namco's art department, and I think that's certainly reflected in the game's aesthetic. It's whimsical, cartoony, and playful, offsetting perhaps some of the broader, cosmos-ending implications of the game's story. The apocalypse is here, and it's goofy as heck. Indeed, as Shakespeare's Hamlet once said to his childhood friend, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." The point is, if you stop rolling for just a moment and actually pay attention to the kinds of things that populate the earth and subsequently get swept up by the prince in Katamari Damacy, you'll note the sheer absurdity of it all. The Earth of Katamari Damacy is a world in which teddy bears ride around in saucepans, in which this thing stalks the high seas, and in which far too many blokes sport this outrageous haircut. It's absurdist, nonsensical, and utterly hilarious. I've yet to even talk about the music, but I'll just check off enjoyable and funny right here. I hope you don't mind. Of course, even in its cutscenes, the game maintains this sense of beautiful ludicrousness, as you've been seeing throughout the chapter changes in this review. In contrast, its promotional art almost seems rather calming, rather peaceful. considering the great big Katamari ball about to roll up the city, and honestly it makes you recall the works of Hiroshi Nagai, whom I touched upon briefly in my previous review. I mean, seriously, wouldn't this make a cracking cover for a city pop album? Speaking of music, this is once again another avenue where Katamari Damacy shines, and perhaps even where it shines the brightest. You know it's got a good soundtrack when the series has a whole, rather lengthy Wikipedia page dedicated to it. Much like a certain Seattle-based radio host's furniture, the soundtrack is eclectic, featuring many different types and styles of music, largely on theme, which all serves to present a playlist which ends up being a beautiful tribute to so many kinds of J-pop. While selecting the kinds of songs that they wanted for the game, Kaita Takahashi and the sound director, Yu Miyake, decided that they needed a pretty silly, goofy selection of singers to appeal to a broad spectrum of people from different generations. They also aimed to ensure that whilst each song may represent a genre that sounded familiar, it shouldn't be too trendy, ensuring that the finished soundtrack would remain timeless. Much like Final Fantasy IX, it's an OST that simply must be shared, and I couldn't imagine producing this review without it, so you've been able to experience it yourself throughout this video. Katamari on the Rocks, the game's main theme, gets the blood pumping. Lonely Rolling Star spurs the memory to recall the kind of upbeat, high-energy performance you get from a Japanese idol concert. Its whimsical, bouncy melody masking much more melancholy lyrics, which talk about a lover simply waiting for her partner to return after a long time away. I do, however, want to draw special mention to Sera Sera, a particularly jazzy, Sinatra-esque melody which should be caressing your ears right about now. It's a love song of sorts, about rolling up together and becoming a single star in the sky. It's very appropriate, and I think that it may be my favourite.
I hear you calling me. I wanna word you up into my life.
When I played through Katamari Damacy for the first time a few years ago, I had an epiphany. It was a familiar feeling, the same kind I had when playing through Yakuza 0, Dragon Quest VIII and Road Trip Adventure for the first time. It was the sensation that I'd come across something truly special. Katamari Damacy is the culmination of a dream, the realization of something stupendous, and the deliverance of an imaginative, inspired Japanese game developer. It is a concept, a conglomeration of different parts that could truly only be realized when assembled and arranged within the interactive medium. It can only be expressed in a video game. Between its utterly off-the-wall setting and story, its one-of-a-kind, easily digestible gameplay, and overall presentation to die for, Katamari Damacy is a must-play in my opinion, and easily ranks amongst the highest of the games that I've reviewed for this channel thus far. As perhaps you may have deduced by my enthusiasm in the previous section, I believe that by far and away the greatest asset of this first installment in the Katamari series was its artistic merit. As an idea on a drawing board, Katamari Damacy is novel. As a video game, it's revolutionary. But from an artistic standpoint, it's a masterpiece. At the beginning of this review, I described Katamari Damacy as being about community. Nowhere better is this personified than the choice made when designing the Japanese cover of the series' second entry, We Love Katamari. Both within and outside the confines of its universe, on a meta level, Katamari Damacy is a celebration of when objects, concepts, ideas, things, and people, like, for example, a team of highly talented Japanese game makers, come together and create something magnificent. Despite the initial hesitation of Kaita Takahashi, the sequel to Katamari Damacy entitled We Love Katamari was released not that much longer after the original game. It's also a quality experience, and I'll be getting around to it in due course. With all that said, please do consider joining me next time when I'll be talking about a different game. Returning to the PlayStation 2 once more, we'll be looking at a video game which serves as a warning to us all, alerting us to the hazards of fooling around with dark eco.